Access to Cantore ParVol family add-ons. Responsible for tracking parabolic involutes on MetaStock. Hello. In another video aimed at illustrating the methods of nonlinear graphical analysis, this figure was presented which sees the application of some parabolic involutes both to the Dow Jones Index, here expressed on a monthly time frame, and to two of its algorithmic indicators, such as the RSI indicator and the OBV indicator. This graph has also been recalled in its version with a daily time frame. Basically, it has the same parabolic involutes seen on the previous chart at a monthly time frame. They are uniquely customized in their graphic expression by changing the colors of both the parabolic involutes themselves and the background of the graph. An important aspect regarding these parabolic involutes, whether they are placed on the index chart or these other placed on the charts of the algorithmic indicators, concerns the fact that they are all characterized by the positioning of the 3 points of tangency on a date no later than January 31st, 2020. As has already been extensively described in the other video, these parabolic involutes are tracked with the free version of MetaStock's add-ons. For the parabolic involutes on the index chart, the Cantore ParVol F add-on was used. The Cantore ParVol RSAF add-ons was used to plot the parabolic involutes on the RSI indicator chart, and finally the Cantore ParVol BVF add-ons was used for those placed on the OBV indicator chart. With a little patience, if you want to follow us, we will now rerun, step by step, these charts starting from a standard representation of the Dow Jones Index of the American stock market. When opening the chart with MetaStock's Power Console device, it looks like this and requires some customizations that we are now going to develop. The first is to ignore the evolution of the volumes and then click on this button to delete the box. The second very important thing is to establish that the scale of the quotations must be set on a manual basis. In this regard, we can maintain the width of the scale either on the default data or we can fix them to our liking. Finally, although it is not absolutely necessary, it is nevertheless advisable for the author to remove this representation of the vertical grids, and here we have the chart of the Dow Jones Index on which we can go to trace the parabolic involutes. To track the parabolic involutes, we refer to the special add-ons that we see here in the MetaStock Algorithmic Indicators window. They are defined as Cantore ParVol F, with the letter F acronym for free, such as Cantore ParVol RSIF and Cantore ParVol BVF, while the corresponding versions without the letter F indicate the professional version of the same add-ons. To apply these functions, in this first access presentation to these innovative nonlinear graphic analysis tools, it is useful to operate with a graph with a monthly time frame, in this regard, as is well known. To transform the default chart from daily time frame to monthly time frame, simply operate on the command at the bottom right. We can now acquire the first add-on, which is Cantore ParVol F, or the add-on responsible for plotting parabolic involutes on the Dow Jones Index chart. In this regard, we drag the indicator onto the Dow Jones chart, and then we will get to know its contents. By clicking on the Merge on the Right Scale command, we immediately get a first parabolic involute by default, which we are now going to get to know in more detail by reducing the time extension of the graph on the screen in this regard. The parabolic involute that we have thus traced is positioned on 3 points indicated by the 3 vertical lines. It is perfectly tangent to these 3 points that have been placed by default in the Properties tab of the Parabolic Involute Tracking add-on. Let's get to know better what parameters are related to parabolic involutes. The first 3 windows concern the date of the 3 points of tangency that constitute the essential element for tracing a parabolic involute. In practice, for each of the 3 points of tangency, the number of the month, from 1 to 12, is first indicated and then, as in the case in question, operating on a monthly time frame graph, the last day of the month is indicated. For the first point, it responds to the 30th day of the month of September, which is indicated by the number 9. This is followed by 3 numbers indicating the year that, in the case in question, the number 011 indicates 2011. In other cases, we may have to type, for example, 986 to indicate the year 1986. For the second point, we see January 31st, 2016, and finally for the third, as a default point, the Cantore ParVol F add-on proposes May 31st, 2019. Clearly, these data can be easily changed. For example, we can anticipate the date of tangency of the third point by a month, and here the vertical parameter will change position slightly. The second series of windows allow the possibility of repositioning the points of tangency of the second and third points up or down. This mode is not provided for the first point. Now suppose, for example, that we want to pass this parabolic involute approximately on the low of December 2018. In this regard, we try to reduce the third point by 2,000 units. In the figure you can see the displacement of the parabolic involute, but which is not yet perfectly tangent to the desired minimum. We are close. We are still lowering the positioning of the third point by 700 units. This is roughly where the parabolic involute is tangent to the low of December 2018. The last window at the bottom allows you to modify the graphic representation of the parabolic involute traced. While with the number 1, proposed by default, we see the parabolic involute and 3 straight line segments indicating the points of tangency. With the number 2, we see the 3 points of tangency of the parabolic involutes described practically with the date and with the relative quotations. Finally, with the number 3, we have a complete graphical representation of the coordinates of the 3 points of tangency of the parabolic involute both in terms of date and in terms of quotations. This mode of representation can be useful especially when you have to create parabolic channels and therefore respect the same dates, but with different quotations. At the moment, we overlook this technical method of tracing the parabolic channels. It is clearly possible to modify the visual representation of parabolic involutes, such as this red one that makes it thicker, and we make the vertical segments in dashes. With reference to what we have seen previously, now let's draw a second parabolic involute, bringing the first back to the standard conditions in order to create a graph absolutely similar to this one. In this regard, we reset the vertical repositioning of the third point to 0 and bring its point of tangency back to the original date of May 31st. We can now draw a second parabolic involute and, in this regard, the Cantore ParVol F add-on again reproposes, and it could not be otherwise, the same default parabolic involute, and therefore, even if we struggle to see it, the parabolic involute we have traced repositions itself on the original default one. We can easily create the parabolic channel by means of an adequate repositioning of this second parabolic involute, which we make green to distinguish it from the first. To make it more similar to the one already seen previously, and make it parallel to it in order to form a parabolic channel, we are going to position the first point of the parabolic involute being traced on the lows of February 2009 and lower the positioning of the second and third points of tangency by 3,000 units. In this way, we have traced the parabolic channel composed of the 2 parabolic involutes on the chart of the Dow Jones Index and, even with this simplification adopted in the definition of the default points of the parabolic involutes, we observe some interesting aspects. We see, for example, that for this period the parabolic involute has formed a support, here another support, here resistance, and finally all the positive movement taking place from 2023 to 2024 recognizes the presence of this parabolic involute. Here we have created this first graph that we call nonlinear graphic analysis, which is based on the use of parabolic involutes. Let's now move on to the tracing of a second graph relating to the methods of graphical algorithmic analysis that see the plotting of parabolic involutes on the graph of its RSI indicator. To do this, as a starting point, we acquire the Relative Strength Index RSI indicator from MetaStock. Here it is, and we drag it to the bottom of the graph. At the moment, we give OK to its default characteristics, and here we have the representation of the 14-month RSI indicator. As we did for the definition of the manual scale of the Dow Jones Index chart, we similarly define the manual scale of the RSI indicator, and if we want, we can, for example, reduce the amplitude in a range of from 25 to 75. We can now remove the original MetaStock indicator and acquire the add-on, which is Cantore ParVol RSIF. We observe that the default dates of the 3 points on which it is positioned are exactly the same as the Cantore ParVol add-on responsible for tracing the parabolic involutes on the chart of the financial market in question. Unlike the indicator used on the index, the last window at the bottom is no longer suitable for tracking the quotations of the 3 points of tangency, but is responsible for assigning the frequency of the RSI indicator. By default, it is set at 72 periods. This is the basic representation of the interpretation with graphical algorithmic analysis methods of the technical framework of the Dow Jones Index, and for example, it can be observed that for this period, during which the Dow Jones Index has surpassed the red parabolic involute upwards by exiting the parabolic channel under examination, its RSI indicator found resistance from this parabolic involute. To be honest, the parabolic involute we have seen is not particularly significant. In this regard, it is considered appropriate to trace and position another parabolic involute on other points. Let's proceed to draw a second parabolic involute on the RSI indicator. To recall the parabolic involute seen above, we place the 3 points of the one being traced with the first on November 30th, 2009, the second on January 31st, 2018, and finally the third on November 30th, 2019. To make the interpretation expressed by this method of graphical algorithmic analysis more effective, we reshape the frequency of the RSI indicator by reducing it from the 72 months proposed by default to 36 months. All Cantore ParVol RSI indicators must have the same frequency, and therefore we also reduce the frequency of the first Cantore ParVol RSIF indicator to 36 months. Let's graphically customize this parabolic involute, and in this regard, we must first customize the chart of the RSI indicator that we make dark blue. Then we customize the parabolic involute by making it green. We can already see how this parabolic involute is able to satisfactorily interpret the real evolution of the market and, for example, forms a pullback on this point. We can better read the graph described by raising the upper side of the appropriate window to 90 and reducing the lower one to 40. This provides a clearer representation to read of the technical picture proposed by the application of parabolic indicators on the chart of the RSI indicator. We can further improve this representation by applying a second parabolic involute on these dates, which are those taken from the previous screen. We must always track it with the same frequency of 36 months. In order to create a parabolic channel, we raise the second point of tangency by 90 units while we lower the third by 10. Clearly, all these parameters inherent in the positioning of parabolic involutes, but also in identifying the optimal frequency to be applied, are to be identified experimentally. Even if there are some basic rules that allow you to identify effective methods for tracking parabolic involutes. We are almost done. Let's now proceed to the tracing of the Cantore ParVol BVF add-on. In this regard, as a starting point, We draw the chart of the MetaStock on balance volume indicator, which is placed in a new window. For a mere visual perception of the OBV indicator graph, we can increase the vertical amplitude, and we must remodulate the scale of values, which must be substantially the one shown in the figure, but divided by a fixed number equal to 1 million. This scale, which in the case in question goes from minus 537 million, we remove the 6 descriptive zeros of the millions, as for the maximum value of 2 billion, etc. Let's also remove 6 zeros here, and here we have the new window designed to grasp the graph of the Cantore ParVol BVF indicator. The latter has the first 5 windows exactly similar to those concerning the other 2 add-ons we have known, Cantore ParVol F and Cantore ParVol RSIF, while the last window concerns the divider to be applied to the volumes, which by default is set at 1 million. This value varies from market to market because, as is well known, depending on the price of a share, trading volumes can vary radically. In principle, however, the use of 1 million as a divisor lends itself to being valid on almost all financial markets. In any case, here is a parabolic involute by default also on the OBV indicator. At this point, we can remove the lines that referred to the original OBV indicator of MetaStock, and we can still draw a second parabolic involute. It is useful to keep the same dates, but positioned differently. In this regard, we lower the second point by 400 units and the third by 1,500 units, and here we have the representation of this second parabolic involute. We always make the OBV indicator in blue, while this second parabolic involute we make it green. Let's now observe how parabolic involute in this case knows how to identify the disappearance of a critical situation that occurred at the high of early 2022 and which was no longer supported by an increase in volumes. In any case, here is a parabolic involute by default also on the OBV indicator. At this point, we can remove the lines that referred to the original OBV indicator of MetaStock, and possibly we can still draw a second parabolic involute. It is useful to keep the same dates, but positioned differently, and here we have this second parabolic involute. We always do the indicator in blue, and here is that the parabolic involute in this case knows how to identify the disappearance of a critical situation that has been produced to a maximum and that has no longer been supported by an increase in volumes. We reposition the 3 windows that we can see better in this way, and here we have reconstructed what was seen in this figure. There remains the possibility of making some improvements. For example, you can remove the values of the indicator parameters, and then, with a simple click on the window, we remove the values. We can remove these dividing elements from one window to another. Finally, we can, for example, create the background of the chart in another color, or, by choosing the Chrome option, we can make it similar to the one seen previously. Finally, by intervening in the time frame of the graph, making it from monthly to daily and perfectly adapting the points of tangency, they must no longer be positioned on the date of the end of the month, but on dates of actual open market. Here we can easily obtain this graph which, as already mentioned, has the characteristic that all the points of tangent of the parabolic involutes drawn no later than January 31st, 2020. Even with this feature required by the tracking of add-ons free of charge, nevertheless interesting signals can be perceived that are particularly useful for an asset allocation strategy rather than strict operational trading. For example, we talk about the formation of these supports or perceiving the regularity of market evolution from the parabolic channel traced on the chart of the RSI indicator, as well as perceiving important indications from the evolution of the volumes described by the OBV indicator. We can still make a final consideration regarding what we saw in the previous video, regarding the representation of the Dow Jones Index on a logarithmic scale, and how it behaves in relation to the centuries-old trend line. Let's open this figure that shows the chart of the Dow Jones Index with the parabolic involute seen previously and plotted on the usual metric scale. With this metric scale, the yellow trend line, part of the centuries-old trend line, transiting the highs of 1899, 1929, and 2000, does not show up tangent on the pinnacles seen in the previous video, and which were formed in 2018 and 2020. It is sufficient to change the scale of representation of the graph, passing from a metric scale to a logarithmic scale and following some adjustments in relation to the width of the scale. This yellow trend line is perfectly tangent both to the highs of 2000 and to the maxima of formation of the two pinnacles of 2018 and 2020. In a later period, and expressly from the summer of 2022 onwards, the dynamics of the Dow Jones Index followed other rules that can be easily interpreted by a new trend line, such as the one visible in the figure. Following, however, the abandonment of the multi-secular trend line, it can be considered that the dynamics of the Dow Jones Index respond more to the interpretation with nonlinear graphical analysis methods than the indications of linear graphic analysis seen with the multi-secular trend lines. These basic methods of graphical analysis, which see the tracing of common trend lines, must, however, always be applied in conjunction with the techniques of nonlinear graphical analysis in order to achieve a good interpretation of the different financial markets, and on the basis of which to formulate reasonable hypotheses of their development. Well, we're done. All that remains is to encourage you to gain experience with these add-ons that we offer you in free mode, and then resort to professional add-ons. They are substantially the same, but, like the default one we see in the figure, it has points of tangency clearly placed in recent times, and in any case after January 31st, 2020. Thank you for the attention paid to the presentation.
Corrado Cantore.